Ever feel like your mind is playing tricks on you? Like, that phantom phone vibration.
Mhm.
Or maybe you walk into a room and completely forget why. It's like our minds have a mind of their own, right?
It's true. And that feeling of mysterious minds gets right to the heart of what we're diving into today, the mind-body problem. This age-old philosophical puzzle asks, how exactly are our thoughts, feelings, and experiences connected to this physical thing we call our body?
It really is a brain twister, especially when you consider all the amazing things our minds can do, from composing symphonies to solving complex equations, all while we're just going about our day.
And yet all those amazing feats somehow originate from this 3-pound organ made mostly of water, fat, and protein.
So how do we even begin to untangle this mind-body knot? You mentioned we'd be looking at some philosophical heavy hitters.
We are. We'll be exploring how philosophers throughout history have tried to explain the connection between our rich inner world of experiences and the physical processes of our brains.
Lead the way.
Our starting point is a view that's been around for centuries. Dualism. Think of it like this. Oil and water. They just don't mix, right? Dualists see the mind and body as fundamentally different entities.
Right, two separate things. Like a driver in a car, the driver is in control, but they're not the same as the engine or the wheels.
Exactly. And no one drove that point home quite like René Descartes, a 17th century philosopher. He argued that the mind was a non-extended thinking substance, basically, non-physical stuff, totally distinct from the physical stuff of our bodies.
Okay, so for Descartes, the mind is doing the thinking, the feeling, the experiencing, while the body is just along for the ride.
Pretty much. And this idea that our minds are separate from our bodies might seem pretty intuitive at first. Think about it. When you're craving pizza, it feels like your mind is making that decision, not just your stomach rumbling.
It's true. It feels like my mind is calling the shots.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're so separate, how do they actually interact? How does my thought about wanting pizza turn into me actually grabbing a slice?
You've hit on one of the biggest challenges for dualism, explaining how this non-physical mind can have a physical effect on the body. Descartes believed this interaction happened in the pineal gland, a tiny structure deep inside the brain.
Interesting. So even Descartes struggled to pinpoint exactly how the mind and body were connected.
Exactly. And with modern neuroscience, we've learned a lot more about the brain than Descartes could have ever imagined. We now know that even seemingly simple actions like picking up a slice of pizza involve a complex interplay of neurons firing across different areas of the brain.
It does make you wonder if the mind-body connection is more complicated than just two separate entities somehow communicating. So if dualism isn't the perfect answer, what are some other perspectives?
Well, some philosophers propose a more unified approach. Monism. Instead of two different substances, they suggest there's only one fundamental kind of stuff in the universe.
Okay, so instead of oil and water, we're talking maybe like different forms of energy.
Yeah.
Or different states of matter.
You've got the right idea. And within monism, the dominant view today is physicalism. This perspective says that everything, including our minds and consciousness, ultimately boils down to physical processes in the brain.
So my love for pizza is really just a bunch of neurons firing in a specific pattern. That almost seems too simple.
It might seem that way, but remember, the brain is incredibly complex. Now, there are different flavors of physicalism, each with its own way of explaining how mental states relate to brain states.
Different flavors, like ice cream. Tell me more.
Well, one early flavor, known as behaviorism, took a radical approach. They said, let's stop speculating about internal mental states altogether. They argued that we can understand the mind entirely by observing outward behavior.
So if I see you reaching for that slice of pizza, I can assume you're craving it, regardless of what's actually going on inside your head.
Exactly. Behaviorism tried to simplify things by focusing solely on observable actions. But as you might imagine, it had its limitations.
I can see how that could get tricky. What if you were just grabbing that pizza for a friend? Your behavior wouldn't really reflect your mental state in that case.
Precisely. Behaviorism ultimately fell out of favor because it just couldn't fully capture the richness and complexity of our inner experiences. But it was an important stepping stone, pushing philosophers to think more critically about how we define and study the mind.
It's like they cleared the path for new ideas to emerge. So what came next in the world of physicalism?
Next up is identity theory, which took a more direct approach. Instead of just focusing on behavior, identity theorists argued that mental states are brain states.
So my fear of spiders, my joy at hearing my favorite song, even my deepest philosophical musings, they all boil down to specific patterns of neurons firing in my brain.
Exactly. It's like saying that lightning, instead of being a separate thing from electrical discharge, just is electrical discharge, just at a grander scale.
I'm starting to get a sense of how complex this all is. But what about the fact that our brains are all a little different? If my brain processes information differently than yours, wouldn't that mean our mental states are also different, even if we're both experiencing the same thing?
Excellent question. And that leads us to a challenge for identity theory known as multiple realizability. Essentially, it means that the same mental state, like feeling pain, could be realized by different physical states in different organisms.
So even though my dog's brain is wired differently than mine, we can both experience the joy of going for a walk or the fear of a thunderstorm.
Precisely. And this difference in how our brains are structured makes it tricky to say that any given mental state is identical to one specific physical state.
So if identity theory has its flaws, where do we go from here?
Well, that brings us to another intriguing flavor of physicalism, functionalism. Imagine your mind is like a vending machine.
A vending machine. Okay, now I'm really curious. How does my mind work like a snack dispenser?
Think about it this way. You press a button on the vending machine that's like a sensory input to your brain. The machine processes that input and dispenses a specific snack that's like your brain generating a mental state or behavior based on the input.
So my brain is taking in information from the world around me and then spitting out thoughts, feelings, and actions, like a vending machine dispensing treats.
You got it. Now, here's where the analogy gets really interesting. Different vending machines might have slightly different mechanisms inside, but they can still perform the same function. They can all take your money and give you a snack.
And in the same way, our brains might be wired differently, but we can still experience the same mental states. Like you and I might both feel happy when we see a puppy, even though our neurons are firing in slightly different patterns.
Exactly. Functionalism says it's the functional role of a mental state that defines it, not the specific physical stuff that makes it happen. Your happiness and my happiness might have different neural underpinnings, but they both serve the same function. They make us smile, feel good, and want to pet the puppy.
I love that. So it's not about the physical nuts and bolts, but about what those nuts and bolts are actually doing, how they're functioning in the grand scheme of our mental lives.
Precisely. And this makes functionalism a very versatile theory. It can account for how different brains, even the brains of animals, could potentially experience similar mental states.
Okay, I'm definitely warming up to functionalism, but are there any philosophical curveballs that this theory strikes out on?
Well, remember those qualia we talked about earlier? That subjective, felt quality of experience. Qualia have proven to be a major headache for all physicalist theories, including functionalism.
Right, qualia, like the difference between reading about the color blue and actually seeing blue, or knowing that coffee has caffeine,
Yeah.
but not really getting that energy boost until you take that first sip.
Exactly. You can know everything there is to know about the physical processes of seeing blue or tasting coffee, but that doesn't necessarily tell you what it's actually like to have those experiences. And that's where functionalism seems to hit a wall.
So even if functionalism can explain how our brains process information and generate behavior, it struggles to explain the subjective experiential side of things. Like, how do you explain the taste of coffee to someone who's never tasted it before, just by describing the way their taste buds and neurons are firing?
It's a tough one, and that's where the explanatory gap comes in. Some philosophers, like David Chalmers, argue that subjective experience is fundamentally different from the physical world, and that no amount of brain science will ever fully bridge that gap.
So we're left with this mysterious gap between what our brains are doing and what it feels like to be alive and experiencing the world.
In a way, yes. And this leads to some truly mind-bending questions, like, could there be other beings out there that are functionally equivalent to us? They process information, make decisions, even write poetry, but they don't have any inner experience. They're just going through the motions without actually feeling anything.
That's both fascinating and a little creepy. It's like those philosophical zombies you hear about. They look and act like us, but there's no one home, so to speak.
Exactly, and it highlights just how difficult it is to get a handle on the nature of consciousness. Now, some philosophers think we've been going about this whole mind-body problem the wrong way. They suggest that instead of focusing solely on what's going on inside our heads, we need to consider the role of the external world in shaping our minds.
Intriguing. So instead of just looking inward, we need to start looking outward.
Precisely. And this brings us to a family of views known as externalism.
Externalism.
Yeah.
So is this where our minds literally start going outside our bodies? I hope I get to keep mine.
You're safe. It's not that our minds are physically located outside our bodies, but rather that the content of our thoughts, the meaning of our words, even our very capacity to think, might be shaped by factors outside our heads.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me an example of how this externalism thing works.
Let's imagine you have an identical twin, but you were separated at birth and raised in completely different environments. You grew up speaking English, they grew up speaking Japanese. Now, you both have the same word for water. You say water, they say Mizzou.
Okay, same concept, different words.
Exactly. But here's the thing, even though you both have the same internal mental representation of water, the meaning of that representation is different for each of you because it's connected to your different experiences and interactions with the world.
So my understanding of water is shaped by my childhood memories of swimming pools, rain, and drinking fountains, while my twin's understanding is shaped by their experiences with, say, onsens, tea ceremonies, and rice paddies.
Precisely. Externalism suggests that our thoughts and words don't just get their meaning from inside our heads, but from our interactions with the world around us.
It's like our minds are casting these invisible nets out into the world, gathering meaning and understanding from everything we encounter.
A very poetic way to put it. And it highlights the idea that our minds aren't just isolated entities trapped inside our skulls, but are deeply interconnected with the world. And some philosophers take this idea even further, suggesting that the environment can actually become part of our cognitive processes.
Wait, so you're saying that things outside my head could actually influence how I think?
Exactly. This is known as cognitive externalism. Think about how you rely on things like smartphones, calculators, or even a simple to-do list to help you think, remember things, and solve problems.
So tell me about it. I practically live on my phone these days. It's like an extension of my brain at this point.
And that's precisely the point. Cognitive externalism suggests that these tools don't just augment our thinking, they can actually become integrated into our cognitive processes, shaping how we perceive, reason, and interact with the world.
So it's not just I think, therefore I am. It's more like I think, therefore we are, with we, encompassing all the tools and technologies that help us think.
You've hit the nail on the head. Cognitive externalism challenges us to expand our definition of what constitutes a mind and to recognize the crucial role that the environment plays in shaping our cognitive abilities. But wait, there's one more twist to this externalism tale.
A twist? Don't tell me my mind is about to get even more intertwined with the outside world.
Well, prepare to have your mind bent a little further. We've talked about how externalism might apply to the content of our thoughts and the processes of cognition, but what about those elusive qualia? Could externalism shed any light on the subjective, felt aspects of our experiences?
You're talking about phenomenal externalism, right?
Yeah.
The idea that even our qualia, those raw fields of experience, might somehow extend beyond our brains.
You got it. It's a radical idea, but one that some philosophers find incredibly compelling. It suggests that the environment might play a role in shaping not just what we experience, but also how we experience it.
Okay, now you're going to have to walk me through this one. How could something outside my head influence the actual feel of my experiences? That sounds almost impossible.
It might sound strange at first, but consider this. Imagine listening to a piece of music you love, but you're listening to it in two completely different settings.
Okay, I'm picturing it. First, I'm listening to this music in a cramped, stuffy room with bad acoustics. Now, I transport myself to a beautiful concert hall with amazing sound. Same song, totally different vibe.
Exactly. The external environment. In this case, the acoustics of the room can actually shape the way you experience the music. The sound waves hitting your eardrums might be the same, but the feeling of being enveloped by the music, the emotional resonance, those qualia, can change dramatically depending on the context.
So my experience of the music isn't just about what's happening inside my head. It's also about my relationship to the world outside my head.
Precisely. And phenomenal externalism takes this idea even further. Imagine you're looking at a vibrant red apple. Now imagine you had a color blindness test and you realize you've been misidentifying red your whole life. It's not actually red to you, it's a shade of brown. Phenomenal externalists would say that even though your internal experience of the color hasn't changed, your understanding of that experience, the way you relate it to the world and to other people's experiences, has shifted.
Wow. So in a way, my understanding of the color red actually depends on how that color exists in the world outside my own perception of it.
You're getting it. It challenges us to reconsider where the boundaries of our subjective experience really lie. Are they entirely contained within our skulls, or do they extend outwards, intertwined with the world around us?
My mind is officially blown. And I thought dualism and monism were brain twisting. This whole idea of externalism really changes the game.
It certainly does. It suggests that the mind isn't just this isolated thing inside our heads, but is part of a much larger web of relationships, interactions, and influences.
Almost like we're part of this giant interconnected system with information flowing back and forth between our minds, our bodies, and the world around us.
A beautiful way to put it. And it speaks to the incredible complexity of the mind-body problem. It's not a simple question with a simple answer.
We've gone from ancient philosophers pondering the soul to modern neuroscientists mapping the brain, and yet we're still grappling with the same fundamental questions.
And that's the beauty of it. The mind-body problem isn't something we solve, it's something we keep exploring. It pushes us to keep asking big questions, to keep searching for deeper understanding.
Well, this deep dive has definitely given me a lot to chew on. We've explored different flavors of dualism, monism, even mind-bending externalism, and I'm walking away with a whole new appreciation for the incredible mystery that is the mind.
It truly is a mystery, and one that each of us gets to explore every single day. So the next time you're lost in thought, marveling at a sunset, or simply enjoying a cup of coffee, take a moment to appreciate the wonder of your own mind and its intricate connection to the world around you.
And who knows, maybe someday, through the combined efforts of philosophers, scientists, and curious minds everywhere, we'll finally start to unravel the secrets of the mind-body connection.
Until then, the exploration continues.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the mysteries of your own mind. This has been The Deep Dive. And remember, stay curious.